Okay. All right. So the July 2021 meeting of the Faculty Advisory Committee to the Board of Regents. Just let's get going. Let's begin with approval of the agenda.
So move.
Second?
Second. Mirna, second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Checking chat also.
Could we move up the vaccination question to the first item? That's the only modification I'd suggest.
All right, let's, because that was not a complete vote anyway. So we want to propose moving mandatory vaccine policy, and I don't think it's going to matter, David, because I don't think our reports are going to be particularly long.
All right, leave it after this then. That's fine.
Okay. All right, and so let's do that again. All in favor? And I'll check the chat also. Aye.
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 Okay. So let's move on to the approval of the June minutes, which are linked in, it's linked on the agenda, and I've also placed a link to it in the chat for anyone who hasn't glanced at it before now.
So for the minutes, Kalina, under FAC elections, I was reelected for NVCC.
Okay,
You can add that in.
we'll make that addition. Anything else? All right, so motion to approve the minutes with the addition of Ron as a representative for Naugatuck Valley. Do you have a motion?
So moved.
Right.
Second.
Great. And all in favor in our infinite loop here.
Aye.
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 May I just ask who is calling user 2?
Lois, I think that's probably me. It's Barbara. I'm just doing
You're
the screen and the phone both so I can move around and still hear.
Oh,
Barbara.
okay. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Our minutes are approved. Let's move on. Okay, reports of the chair and vice chair. We really just had the single BOR meeting since our last meeting, I believe, David. And I know that for me, the only things I want to note is that you have a link to the BOR June meeting agenda packet as an item for the mandatory vaccine policy, which I think David will talk about. But in addition, if you look there, the Student Advisory Committee gave their report last month. Audrey Nielsen, I think, did a really great job of providing some very helpful, critical suggestions about the better functioning of the board and the need for greater input from both students and faculty, among many other things. It was a fairly good report, so it's worth taking a look at, whether in the recording of the meeting or reading her report. And as long as we're mentioning joint meetings, as you know, we were scheduled to have a reply to the questions that we sent to the system office / board. We were supposed to get them on June 4th, I believe, in preparation for our last meeting so that we could respond and then schedule a joint meeting of the board and FAC in August. These joint meetings are required twice yearly by statute, but just have not been happening for years. David began really pushing on this point last year. We finally got to the point where we were scheduling something, it seemed, this spring. The Student Advisory Committee has also been pushing very hard on that, talking about the need for these joint meetings to happen once again. We were put off by a month because there was such a scramble in the month of June to do any number of other things, and the transition to a new president. The suggestion was that we put it off by a month. Earlier this week, when I looked into where these questions, where the answers were, we were told that it no longer seems necessary, I suppose, to the system to respond to our questions. They believe that many of the questions have been answered elsewhere, like in the report to NECHI, and in the financial update to the legislature on the merger. Now, I failed to see those answers in either of those documents or anywhere else, and that was the reason for the questions being asked the way that they were asked. But we're not going to get those answers, it seems, or certainly not in the format that we requested. There has been a suggestion, and I just want to make sure that I represent it correctly, so I'll look right at the email from Alice Pritchard. So, you know, she says that President Chang really wants to restart a conversation with the FAC, and suggested that we pick maybe 2 of the topics that we brought up in those questions and have a conversation at our next meeting with President Chang and with whoever is appropriate from the system office to facilitate that kind of discussion. And then we could schedule a joint meeting of the BOR and FAC sometime in the fall. So we can think about, I suppose, and we'll bring it back up again in new business at the end, if there are 2 questions or 2 topics that we'd really like to broach with our new president next month, and what they would be and how we want, how we want to do that. But that's where we are with our joint meetings of the BOR and FAC, which I believe have not happened for years and years, despite the fact that they are described in the statute. So I'll kick it to you, David, and I suspect that I don't know if you want to report on anything beyond the mandatory vaccines, and if not, we can just move to the next item.
Well, there's just a quick item on the guided pathways.
Okay.
And I brought this up at the Finance Committee. I brought it up at the board meeting as well, and that is the intention of the system office to hire 174 advisors within the year. That is to say, whereas previously they had stated they wanted to test it out and roll it out, I guess, in phases, beginning with 3 of the community colleges, with additional money from HERF 3 and ARPA, they now intend to do the whole thing in one shot within the year. And in the finance report, what I objected to, besides the fact that they haven't done a pilot to find out what works and what doesn't in the Connecticut context, in the finance report, the funding for it is $4 million, nearly $5 million of state ARPA funds. That's American Recovery Funds. 15.8 million of HERF funds, HERF 3. That makes for almost a little bit over $20 million, which disappears after FY23. Right, so that they are, in effect, there's a fiscal cliff over which they fall. The claim, of course, is that somehow within 1 year, in enrollment, retention, and the number of courses and credits that students will take will so improve that that will compensate for the missing $20 million. I thought that was a significant matter. In fact, it was discussed. In fact, there's an article that appeared in the Connecticut Examiner precisely on that issue. It was referenced in one of the CSCU daily emails of references to what is going on. And the claim that this is going to be an immediate success, I suppose, is based largely on a study by a group at Columbia University that studies community colleges. And in fact, in the article, it is actually stated by one of the persons that, generally speaking, it takes 3 to 4 years to roll out this kind of a program. And that's from the horse's mouth, as it were. So I made that criticism, if you please, or that comment, both at the Finance Committee and at the board meeting with the usual zero impact. But I think that it's something that is a matter of concern. Where does the $20 million come from after FY23? Right, for a board which prides itself on fiscal stability and whose main argument in favor of students first was the fiscal cliff that would appear sometime in the mid-2020s, here they are, in fact, creating one.
If I could jump in, I think it's also important to point out, like, in addition to the extra time that Davis Jenkins says that it would require to implement this successfully, implementing guided pathways is not just hiring a bunch of advisors, it's also the curriculum and pathways and even the developmental reforms. So like ACME is part of this, but as we know that ACME is unfunded. It has no funding of its own. So the likelihood of success without any kind of allocated funds to make sure that it will be successful is, you know, I don't know where that's coming from. So if you look at the NECHI report, for example, it does say that all of this is to ensure our financial stability. And this seems to be the opposite of that kind of move.
So that's, I'll just give you the quote from Dr. Davis Jenkins, Senior Research Scholar at Community College Research Center at Columbia University. Those are the people whose report Jane Gates brought to my attention at the board meeting as complete justification for the one-year implementation of guided pathways, and told CT Examiner that it normally takes 4 years to roll out guided pathways completely. Right. And he just said, however, he also recognized the severity of the enrollment problems at Connecticut's state colleges. Well, so that was a position, I guess, in between mine and that of the board itself. I'll say no more about it. It's a matter that of record at this point.
Go ahead, Ron.
Yeah, I think the other point that was made. First of all, thank you, David, for making those points for us in the Finance Committee. That was really important that those points be made. I also noticed in the documents that you sent out to us that the success of guided pathways requires that these advisors work very closely with faculty, and we can't even get the BOR to answer questions and have a meeting with us. So I don't see how that's going to be successful when there is no communication between anyone hired in the guided pathways area and faculty coordinating programs. I just don't see how that's even going to happen. The other issue that I thought was interesting in the documents that you sent us, David, was the 2.5, the assumption of a 2.5% increase in tuition every year. It seems to me that that's really where they intended to make up the difference, but they're pricing the poorest and most vulnerable students. Eventually they'll price the poorest and most vulnerable students out of our system. And those community colleges, our mission, right, requires us to keep our tuition as low as we possibly can. And I found those increases of 2.5% per year of tuition to be pretty offensive to our mission.
I'm not sure that I recall that.
It was in one of the documents that you sent. It had the assumptions that were being made regarding the budget.
The assumptions being made about budget were there would be no increases for faculty salaries. But correct me if I'm wrong, I thought, and I'm going to have to double check, I'm sorry about this, I thought that they were holding the tuition constant at the community colleges, but increasing it at the universities.
Let me go, I'll go take a look and
Would
see
you
if I
check
find
that?
that.
Yeah, just check, double check for the
Yeah,
fact.
I'll check on that. I thought I saw it in the document.
But I do agree with Colina that all this has to merge together. It has to. There's not just the guided pathways. There's also the program alignments. There's also all of the other measures which the board has mandated on recommendation from the system office, and to do all of those things at the same time just strikes me as very difficult. And as you point out, Ron, in a context where there are, to say the least, strained relations between faculty and the leadership at the system office and the board, that makes the doing this properly very difficult.
So David, it's Appendix D, budget assumptions fiscal year 22 to 26. The top line on that document says tuition and fee rates. And it says FY22 level funded from FY21, and then FY23 projected through
Oh, I see.
26 projected, so assumes 2.5 increase over prior year.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. I was thinking of this year and next year. So you're right. Well,
Myrna? Oh, sorry. Myrna's hand is up when you're done, David.
yeah, I'm going to stop this if I can. Sorry.
Thank you. I have two comments. Kalina, when you were mentioning that the meeting between FAC and the board office is going to be pulled off, am I understanding it's going to be delayed? Is that what you were saying earlier when I logged in?
Yes, that there is now an intention to schedule a joint meeting of the FAC and BOR for some time in the fall, and that what Alice Pritchard has offered is that we could schedule something to focus on just maybe 2 questions or 2 topics in August, and have the appropriate system staff there to answer those questions in August. And I'll just say, of course, we asked for certain things in writing so that there would be time to reflect, to check calculations, to respond thoughtfully. I don't necessarily know how, we've had, when Ben Barnes is here, he answers questions, and he's great in terms of providing information. But the idea was to move the conversation a step beyond that. So yeah.
Well, the reason I'm asking for clarification is because, and I haven't read it in a while, but the statute indicates a meeting. Does it define what the meeting is supposed to be like? I mean, who defines the meeting? Is it a meeting of us reporting to them? Is it a meeting of dialogue? Because if it does specify, then we can go back to the statute to see what our interpretation is. Otherwise, they're in violation. Isn't that correct?
They are, and have been for quite some time, despite repeated requests from both the FAC and the SAC.
So with that said, them being in violation, who makes them accountable? And how do we appraise the legislators who approve this, that BOR is in violation of a mandate that they voted on? I mean, somebody has to be accountable. Don't you think? And I'm thinking, it's I know, maybe I just want to translate what I believe to be the case. And if we continue to say it's okay, so we'll put it off, they'll never meet with us. They don't want to meet with us. It's obvious.
I mean, I agree. David and I had a couple of meetings in preparation for the meeting, in preparation for a meeting to plan potentially a joint meeting of the FAC and BOR. I'm not sure that was time particularly well spent, and what it means is that we're getting further and further down the road this year, and our tenure will end. And it's not clear whether or not we will actually have this meeting, or that we will have any of the information necessary to make the meeting productive if we do have it. The statute does say that it is a meeting that the agenda should be decided upon jointly between FAC and BOR, but it is chaired by the BORs. It would be chaired by Matt Fleury. So yeah, we just have not gotten to the point where we can do that, and I don't know that we'll ever be at a point that we could do it ideally productively, so that we could, we have a function to perform, to advise the board, and we need the necessary information, so yes, and I don't want to be, I try to be sort of diplomatic in these things, but I don't want to be interpreted as saying that this is okay and we're going to kick it down the road. The higher ed committee is aware, and I think, but was also aware that we were in the process of planning this. So we will continue to keep them kind of informed about the progress towards planning this meeting.
Do we report to anyone in the legislature in terms of whether or not we comply with the mandate or not? Again, I'm just going back to the accountability.
Yeah. So that would be Derek Slapp and Josh Elliott primarily, I believe, right? Higher Ed Committee.
And it's just some fuel for thought is whether or not we should talk about the challenges that we face with regard to this meeting. That's really what I wanted to make comment on. The second thing was relative to the budget. When we say that there's going to be an increase in fiscal year 23, does that assumption include the fact that the community colleges are going to be free tuition, in between quotes, free tuition and for students? Does that account for that?
Well, the legislature has a fully funded PACT for the next at least 2 years. And so, in fact, there's an extra $54 million coming into the system budget overall, in addition to monies from, or including monies from HERE 3. So there's a considerable increase. The fiscal situation of the system is actually, at least for the next couple of years, quite good. The problem, as I pointed out, at least with respect to guided pathways, comes about 2 years further down the line. So PACT is funded. The legislature did fully fund it. So the difference between what students get in grants and what the tuition requirement is will be paid for students who are recent high school graduates and taking at least 12 credits.
And then with regard to the advising, the 174 that you indicated, my understanding is we probably should look at the structure, because I understand that there is the student success VP, I think, then there are some regional advisors, and then are those 174 advisors going to be under the regional advisors? So that faculty will probably never get a chance to meet with. There's a lot of layers that basically I'm saying that we, shouldn't we be appraised of the structure and what the plan is for implementing the dialogue between the faculty, the student, and these academic advisors?
There are 5 levels. There are.
That's my
level
point.
1 is the advisor who would have supposedly the 250 caseload of students. The minimum, the criterion for those people, or the requirement, the education requirement, is a bachelor's degree only. Then there's level 2, who are supervisors of the advisors, and they would have to have a master's degree. When asked, I think this was the finance committee, it was said that they might also have a caseload, perhaps of half of what the advisor level 1 would have. Then there were lead advisors who would be at each of the colleges as well, and they would supervise the level 2 advisors who supervise the level 1 advisors. Then there would be advising managers at the 3 regional president's offices. And then there would be, as you mentioned, Myrna, the associate vice president for student success. So that does make 5 levels. I mean, the bulk of the 174 our advisors 1 and 2, and I believe there's a certain number of support staff, perhaps about a dozen included in that.
Fran and then Ron.
Yeah, to follow up on Myrna's point, for what it's worth, I think we should go to the higher ed committee and try to get a letter of some sort to push system office to, follow through. Well, certainly the BOR to follow through on the joint meeting, but also to answer these questions. It's not much, but I think we need to at least do that. Try to get a letter and try to get people beyond higher ed perhaps to sign that letter. I don't know what else we can do. And in terms of those questions too, so we're allowed to invite somebody in August and ask 2 questions. That's what they're offering. I mean, that's outrageous. We're an oversight committee, among other things. We should be able to invite people constantly, and they should come and answer questions, as long as they're reasonable, pertinent questions. So I see no reason why we shouldn't keep asking for either Ben Barnes or Carrie Kelly, I assume, to answer questions, because most of the questions are fiscal questions, it seems. So I think we should keep asking.
Yeah, and I guess I should say that everything about the communication with the system office indicates that there's a genuine intention to get us there to the meeting, and that the point of the 2 questions is to have more in-depth discussion. But it's just not what we asked for.
Right. So higher ed, letter, press them, push them. I don't know what else we can do.
Go ahead, Ron, and then
Yeah,
Phil.
I just wanted to address, Myrna's comment about the pact. The pact applies to a very tiny percentage of our students at the community colleges. I mean, it sounds like a great thing, free community college, but the vast majority of our students are part-time and they do not qualify.
Right.
The other aspect is many of our students are fully funded federally, and so it does not apply to them. Okay, it only applies, and many of our students are students who did poorly at a state university or another university and then came back to it. So the money doesn't apply to them. It only applies to brand new high school, first time, full-time students. And that, when we looked at it in Ogden Valley, I think the percentage for us that weren't already fully funded by Pell was around 6%. So that's not going to be the money that makes up for the fiscal cliff that the BOR is creating. That PACT money is a very, very, it sounds like a lot of money, but when you spread it out across 12 colleges, it's actually a very, very small figure in terms of our cumulative budget. So the PACT is a really good advertising thing. It's a really good marketing tool, but it really is not that big of a program.
Phil?
I don't know if I am allowed to speak at these meetings or not, but I did want to make a comment about being limited to 2 issues at a meeting with President Chang. I think it is a way to minimize the impact of this committee. I think it's a way to shield Chang from understanding of how many issues this committee has and the faculty has with the BOR. And it seems like a first meeting with him should be without all of his handlers. And it should be for the purpose of letting him know the long list of grievances, concerns, issues, so that he can understand the difficulty that the faculty has had having input into the system. And then it gives the opportunity basically to test him, to see if he's going to be open to working with the faculty or not. You may as well know that from the start, right? But for other people to restrict, his handlers, I would call them, to restrict the amount of information he receives could leave him feeling that the faculty have a couple of issues now and then, right? And it allows them just to continue grumbling to him about how the faculty are just a group of malcontents. I think it's really important to have a personal meeting with him, and for the agenda not to be limited, and perhaps for the purpose of that meeting to let him know how badly deteriorated the relationship is between the faculty and the BOR.
That's a good point. And I should say that I misspoke. Now, looking back at the email, I don't think the offer was to have President Chang and staff at the next meeting, but that we would have staff at the next meeting. And here's the statement. If we can have productive discussions with President Chang and CSCU and Connecticut State staff over the coming months, we'd be well positioned to have a good joint meeting with the BOR at the end of the fall. And that the caution had been all along, how could we are just too far apart, right? We're at risk of too much disagreement to have a productive meeting, right? So it's a pretty big qualifier. If we can have productive discussions, and there's no mention of in what forum we'd have that discussion, maybe we should think about simply inviting President Chang for the next meeting. End of story. Yeah. Go ahead, Lois.
I agree with what Bill said 1,000%, and also what you just said. I think as much as I don't think that Chang is going to be our friend, I think we need to have a meeting with him, and I think we need to not be complacent. We're just allowing them to push us around all over the place. They're turning around and saying to us, "Oh no, we're not going to answer your questions. Too goddamn bad. We're not going to answer your questions." And we're just going to sit back and say, "Oh well, you're not going to answer our questions." I don't know what else we can do. I have to think about it, but I think this has gone way, way, way too far.
And it's not going to answer your questions after stringing us along for several months.
Then it needs to be made public somewhere. Something needs to happen. We need to get AUP's lobbyists, Gallo and what's her names? Gallo and Robinson.
All right. So is the sentiment that we invite President Chang? And I think it's important to just start that dialogue, whatever it will be, so that there's we put our issues out there and hear a little bit from him and see, how we can work together. All right, we'll work on that. Okay. Shall we move on to the vaccine? And sorry about that, folks. I did think that report would be so quick. So, yeah.
All right. Well, I'm in the unusual situation of defending a Board of Regents decision, which we in part and in fact wholly initiated by the working group on mandated vaccination, with a resolution which I sent to all of you to improve the actual implementation of it. Recall that the mandate is all students participating in any on-campus activity at a BOR governed institution are required to be fully vaccinated against COVID-19. Students are required to report vaccination compliance to the college or university they physically attend. Right. In fact, I'm going to share it if I can. I think you have it there. Who knows? I can't see what I'm sharing. And secondly, the CSU president is authorized to create and promulgate COVID-19 mitigation requirements for employees, vendors, visitors, and others to ensure the health and safety of everyone who frequents a BOR-controlled property, including but not limited to requiring vaccination for all employees. And that was the formulation that was produced by the system office staff based on a meeting which the working group had with Jane Gates, Alice Pritchard, and Ernestine Weaver. And at the board meeting, I spoke in favor of this resolution, noting, however, that the implementation is going to be important, and in particular, it's a question of the non-medical exemptions. In our original resolution that we proposed to the board, there was no non-medical exemptions. There was only medical exemptions. At the meeting with the system office trio, Ernestine Williams pointed out that there were problems with respect to the legal status of the vaccines, which had emergency use authorizations. We pointed out that they were already at the biologics license application stage, the BLA stage, and that we expected that that would occur possibly before the fall, but even if it took 6 months, it would occur in the midst of the fall term, and therefore we should anticipate that and exclude non-medical exemptions. The system office were unwilling to do that, and we compromised and said, okay, let's have we'll go along with non-medical exemptions, but let's have very clear criteria, right? And so I'm going to come back to that, because the question before us is whether any and every application for non-medical exemption is to be automatically accepted or not. If you look at the document which I sent to you, you have here, and it's hard to see. I hope you can see it on. This is actually the form which is up on the CSCU website, right? The CSCU request for non-medical exemption, and it says conditions. Given the active pandemic, individuals with an approved exemption for non-medical reasons, it says approved exemption, may be instructed to wear masks at all times indoors, subjected to testing, remain off campus during a disease outbreak, and/or be expected to quarantine. If this were to occur, the college university will not refund tuition fees, housing costs, or other expenses for students who must leave campus or quarantine. And the student is asked to acknowledge it. And then on the next page, non-medical exemption. I am opposed to receipt of vaccination and immunization against COVID-19 based on the reasons below. And you can see there's a box here, right? What the resolution that you have before you was intended to do, before I received information that I'll share with you in just a minute, was to sort of clarify that and to narrow it down. For example, we don't want to have, and I think we would all agree on this, non-medical exemptions of the sort that I don't like getting vaccinated. Somebody told me that it's all a plot. They're going to tag us and be able to monitor our activities. I'm going to wait and see. I think it's a plot by one political party against another. Those are unacceptable reasons, which should be rejected out of hand. Moreover, if we look at religious reasons, all of the major religions around the world, leaders have come out in favor of vaccination. And one of the proposals in the resolution before you is to limit the religious exemption, which has been already excluded in the case of grade school vaccinations, as we know, for MMR, to those who belong to religions which preclude, which exclude, which deny all medical intervention. So that would narrow things down considerably, still allowing the possibility of certain non-medical exemptions. So that's in the resolution. The second point on page 2, let me just mention them, go through them quickly. We also wanted to have it stated that for medical exemptions, that it would be a licensed healthcare provider who provides the documentation, not just anybody claiming to be a healthcare provider. For example, my guru, or my neighbor who has watches healthcare programs on TV. The second point, so the first point was to endorse the two action items mentioned at the beginning. The second point was to have licensed healthcare. The third point was I consulted with a clinical psychologist at my university with respect to this question of fear of vaccinations. And most universities which are listing non-medical examinations exclude fear of vaccinations, although there is something called the phobia of injections, and that has very specific criteria, including fainting when presented with a needle and so forth, right? And that would also narrow down some of the medical reasons for exemption. Point 4 is that we originally did not want to have any non-medical exemptions, but point 5 is if there are to be non-medical exemptions, that these should be as limited as possible. Repeated in point 6, a recommendation, requests for non-medical exemptions will be examined on a case-by-case basis. An application for exemption does not guarantee acceptance. Personal objections of a private nature and political considerations will not be accepted, and religion-based requests will be considered only for active members of religions whose founding texts preclude medical interventions. That was a suggestion, right? 7, we dealt with questions of accommodations, that accommodations for students with medical exemptions should take into account also the mode of delivery of the class, and that can't be changed because of a single student. Similarly, students should be advised if a faculty member has a medical exemption and is doing the course online, and should have an option to take another section of the class if there is one with seats available on ground. And number 8 was recommendation for an educational persuasion campaign to explain to students the moral importance of not just protecting themselves, but protecting others, right? And this could be done through TV, through ads, on the radio, pamphlets, and so forth. And then point 9 was, we strongly recommend that all unions of faculty, staff, employees, and vendors at CSCU colleges and universities endorse the principle of mandated vaccination for their members and enter into agreements with CSCU and institutional leadership concerning mutually agreed upon criteria for exemption and measures of accommodation for their members, consistent with the above recommendations as applicable to faculty, staff, and employees. So that was the resolution which I planned to present, and I guess I still will. I can only say that I took the opportunity to request of a senior administrator at my university to find out how the CSCU form was being implemented at my university. And I was astounded. And I must say, I am distressed. I am actually depressed to find out that on directive from the system office, not from the Board of Regents, but from the system office, that every and all requests for non-medical exemption are to be automatically accepted. And that at my university, at any rate, they are in the process of modifying the form. Now, this may be a misapprehension at my university. They are in the process of modifying the form to remove the box which says the reason. And that this is supposedly on recommendation verbally from the Attorney General's office, or perhaps even the governor's office. So there's really 2 issues here. One is the resolution which I've outlined before you and which I sent in advance, which was to improve upon the Board of Regents resolution, endorse it, and also improve upon it by specifying some of the aspects of implementation with respect to criteria for non-medical exemption, accommodations, and restrictions. There's now this second issue, which would be, from what I can tell, and I must say I have to reference it to a single senior administrator at my university, who nonetheless I have every reason to believe, that the system office is contradicting the board resolution. That's my impression. And that if we are to admit non-medical exemptions on the basis of any and every request, that in fact undermines and places in not merely grave peril, but negates the mandated vaccine policy. And so that's where we're at, or that's where I'm at. I mean, I found this out at, noon today. So I'm still sort of reacting under the shock of the information. And as I say, it's information based on one person from one institution. But this has to be clarified, because if this is the case, then I couldn't even recommend that the unions endorse this. They would have to defend faculty who are unwilling to return to a campus. We got through the pandemic, particularly at the universities, because although 40% of students, or 30 to 40% of students, were expected to come on campus, barely 5 to 10% actually did. What is going to happen to us when 95% of students are coming back on campus, right? With free-for-all, let me call it that, free-for-all non-medical exemptions. If that is the case, I am still qualifying this. And so, I'm still presenting the resolution for adoption, but I think we also have to state very clearly our complete and total opposition to any free-for-all open mandate for non-medical exemptions.
Lois and then Patty.
I was told yesterday late morning by an administrator at Norwalk Community College that every single request for exemption would be honored. No matter what it was.
That is consistent with what I was told today.
So I would think then it's probably coming from the system office's policy.
It contradicts the Board of Regents policy, by the way, because the Board of Regents resolution says, sorry, I'm just looking for it. Exemptions from this policy will be permitted under certain circumstances.
Well, that can be very broad, David.
Yes. I mean, of course, the devil's in, or there's always questions of interpretation and application, right?
I'm so sure they spoke to the Board of Regents before they made that decision. Again, I heard it yesterday morning. I don't know officially when it was made, but I was told that it sounded, from what I was told, it sounded like it was a relatively new decision at the time.
Well, I personally am stunned.
At
I
some
didn't
level,
believe that
I'm
this
not.
would actually happen. Are there any other individuals, any other members of the FAC who have heard the same thing? So
Patty.
we have one university and one college.
So a couple of things. Andy Kripp was out all of last week because he was on vacation. And I just personally would be very surprised if the system office adopted an approach that any request for non-medical exemption is going to be honored. I could see them applying that to faculty and staff. I don't see them applying it to students. However, I will say when Dean Della Iacono, who is the director of labor relations, met with the union presidents in discussing the issue of vaccinations, did say, and to me this sounds like it came straight from Andy, that what if requiring vaccinations had a negative impact on enrollment? And all of the union presidents said, gee, we don't see that happening. We see requiring vaccinations to be a positive thing. But he wouldn't let that issue go. And he referenced his own teenage daughters who didn't want to get vaccinated. So of course, demonstrating the system office's deep understanding of statistics and public health. If my two kids don't want to get vaccinated, that means other kids probably don't want to get vaccinated either. But in any event, I'd be really surprised. Now, we have bi-weekly meetings with Dean, and our next meeting is this coming Wednesday. And I will certainly raise this issue at that meeting because it's absurd. It's an absurd policy. And of course, we being, I think it's safe for me to say that the other presidents would agree with me on this. We will push back very hard on this. So I find it hard to believe that they would be willing to just simply accept any request for non-medical exemption.
Lois?
Me? You're talking to me? Yeah, well, Patty, I heard it separately and David heard it separately from two different administrators at two different universities, colleges. We heard the same exact thing. So I can't imagine that it's not true.
You know what? Let me just send an email to Dean.
And Bill, you're asking for a more immediate and official response, but I believe, David, before this meeting, you sent an email to the folks at System Office clarifying. Is that right? Okay.
What did I send? While Patty is looking for this. Here's what I said. I sent this to Alice Pritchard. I sent it to all the members of the committee as well. I sent it to Ernestine Weaver. I said, I am just now informed that the system office, Ernestine Weaver in particular, has directed at least my campus authorities that all non-medical exemptions will be automatically accepted. This is not what we agreed to in our meeting with you, Ernestine and Jane Gates. To the contrary, non-medical requests would be judged on their merits on a case-by-case basis. I know of no written argumentation, including testing claims for non-medical exemption according to reasonable criteria, and would like to see that. So far, all I have is a verbal statement that the AG's office stated this verbally, and that was transmitted from Ernestine to my campus leaders also verbally. Should this stand, this undoes the vaccination mandate and imperils the health and safety of the faculty I represent, both at my university and at the FAC. As such, I could no longer be able to recommend to the unions that they endorse the board resolution. To the contrary. This is extremely disappointing and moreover distressing. It is not what other universities are doing, e.g. Yale, which requires reasons for non-medical exemption and a meeting with the committee to discuss its merits. We are not Yale, of course, but I thought that we were more than what, in quotation marks, we now appear to be. I have a FAC meeting at 1 p.m. where I will discuss the matter at some length. This was not the optic in which I intended to present the matter, but if true and continued, this puts in peril, indeed extreme peril, what we had worked for, and I thought perhaps naively, cooperatively agreed upon.
No.
So I may be wrong. This may be wrong. This may be a misapprehension at my university and at Lois's college. I can, and maybe Patty is right. It certainly, when I heard this, and I'm speaking to you only under the shock of the immediate impact. So it's only an hour ago, right? I was furious. I felt betrayed in all the efforts that we had made to cooperate with the system office and with the board. And in fact, I'm saying right now, if it is true, that is a system office directive in contradiction to the Board of Regents' decision. And that's, I think that's serious.
I was, I'm not, a feeling of betrayal following all that work you did to me is not particularly shocking given the history of our interactions here. But I'm just genuinely confused about how this is coherent and tenable. If we lack sufficient authority to, because I'm assuming this would be why all exemptions would be granted, to require students to conform with best medical advice, how on earth could we have the authority to require workers to do what is explicitly against best medical advice and put themselves at risk? Like, how do you bring faculty back to a campus where they are sitting in a room full of the population least likely to be vaccinated because this is not a mandate. It's a misnomer, right? It's not a mandate. There is no mandate if this is in effect. So I just, while I'm kind of used to disappointment in terms of collaboration with the system office, this just makes literally no sense to me, and I'd like to believe that somehow this information is an error. Patty, is your hand up still or again? Okay, so Lois and then Bill.
I think, Colleen, are you looking for sanity in insanity, in general insanity? I still say, I heard this late yesterday morning from an administrator at Norwalk Community College. David heard it this morning from an administrator at Central Connecticut State University. Two different parts of the state, university, community college. What would they have in common? What would they have except that they're all part of CSCU? Why would the same exact thing have been told to the both of us and not be what they have chosen to do? I was told that they were going to have to change the form. The same thing that David was told. I was told that they were going to accept any and all non-medical exemptions, the same thing David was told. I'm not understanding why you're not all saying, hey, we have a problem here, folks. Because this does not strike me as going outside the bounds of what system office might do.
Go ahead, Bill.
I'm sorry, did you call on me?
Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
I was just tuning into what Lois was saying. Just a couple of things. I also have written something to send to the same group that David communicated with. It's nowhere near as eloquent as what David put together, but I just feel that that group needs to hear from more than one person, and David, who is really leading the charge so well, should not stand alone in this. And so I will be sending that later, although I already sent it to you, Colina, and David to look at, perhaps with the hope that it can be improved. But there are a couple of points to make. One is that when agreeing to the request is automatic, it's really not a request, it's an election. People are now electing not to take the vaccine, which is what they've been doing all along. The second thing is to be prepared for the board, for at least the staff's, system office staff's argument, which is, well, we can't force anybody to take the vaccine. And that's true. But having a mandate doesn't force anybody to take the vaccine. Right? The legislation that everybody points to basically says that when there is an emergency use authorization for a vaccine, you can't compel anybody to take it. But you have to tell them what the consequences are of not taking it. And so that's what our policy does. It says, we want you to take the vaccine. If you don't take the vaccine, here's what you will forfeit: your access to being on campus. You will have to choose from courses that are online. It'll limit the range of courses you can take. But that's not forcing anybody to take a vaccine. And yet the people we've spoken with, and I think Ernestine most particularly, resort to that argument. It's a false argument. But I think the important thing is to be prepared to counter that argument. We're not trying to force anybody to take a vaccine. We're saying if you want to be a part of this community in this way, this is a requirement, just as we have other requirements. So that's really what's important. And I think if what appears to be the case is the case, I think it's time. We're not going to get any satisfaction from the BOR nor from the system office. I think it's time to take it public. Because once again, Yale will have its mandate. UConn will go forward with its mandate. And the students who struggle the most are students who are as good as any of those other students, but they're always up against difficulty, right? And that's why they come to us, because we care enough to help them get through those difficulties. They will suffer. They will be exposed when the other students will not. It's a class issue. And I think we need to expose that.
All right. Any more on this issue?
I'm not quite sure what to do with the resolution I presented. Whether we can simply receive it. What I would simply say is that there's no use adopting it under these present circumstances. But I think it should be received by the FAC, so it's an official document, at least presenting a point of view on this.
Sure, and that was emailed to the whole committee earlier, right?
Yeah,
is
so
there
I would ask for a vote to receive it.
Okay. Anyone want to make that motion in second?
I'll make that motion.
Second.
I'm sorry, can you just clarify for me what you mean by receiving it?
Receiving it as a document of the FAC, not as a policy, because I mean I find it difficult at this point to actually defend the resolution I myself proposed, if in fact the whole thing is being undone by what appears to be the case coming from the system office. My resolution was to improve upon the Board of Regents resolution by clarifying some issues in terms of application concerning criteria for non-medical exemption, accommodations, and restrictions. If what Lois and I have said today is true, and it continues to be the case on Monday, and I'll make whatever effort I can over the weekend to try and get that reversed if such is the case. But if that is the case, then in fact the resolution as a policy of the FAC is pointless. But it should be, I think, received by the FAC as the best faith effort that we could make. It was based on meetings with Fran and with Bill and with discussions with faculty at my university and elsewhere. So I think it should have some official status, but it may be pointless as a resolution.
So where would this go? What would happen to this now?
Append it to the minutes.
To the minutes?
Yes.
But I think I would want to make sure that we very clearly state its intention, and then and the fact that it's no longer relevant given that the mandate is no longer in effect or has been undone, right? So we need to very clearly make sure that that is noted.
Or if you want, you can improve it as an alternative to the everything goes. I mean, there is that second possibility. So I sort of leave it to the committee. I'm not sure myself.
I think I would say receiving it is enough, because we have no idea what we're dealing with. We thought there was a resolution that put certain guidelines in place and that we were participating in that world, and our world has shifted. And who knows what parts of this, the context is shifting constantly. So I would recommend just receiving for now until we know what we're dealing with.
Yeah, and I would like to have a resolution, however, opposing unrestricted non-medical exemptions. That's pretty clear.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we should have a resolution to that effect. It's just one line. We stand opposed to a unrestricted non-medical exemptions without any reason being provided or assessed.
And assert
that as a result.
An unrestricted non-medical exemption to a mandate is neither makes it not a mandate, and as Bill pointed out, not an exemption to a mandate. It is simply an election, right? Yeah. Go ahead, Bill.
I'm sorry, I just want to add one other thing. I think the way this is presented is critical because with the last proposal, I think to strengthen this resolution is good. But to say that we withdraw our support of the resolution, although that's exactly what I think we should do if what we're discussing is true, is a little dangerous, because I think that the system office will spin that and say, look, we passed a resolution and now the faculty is opposed to it, right? Without stating the facts as they are. So I think how this is moved forward is really important. So it isn't used somehow to harm the faculty.
Yeah, the resolution which I would make is that the decision, apparently from the system office, to allow any and all non-medical exemptions is in fact in contradiction to the Board of Regents resolution approved on June 24th, and that the FAC opposes that action, should it be the case, of the system office. That is the motion which I'm going to make. Lois, that's
Second.
okay.
Kalina? So here's just something for everyone to think about. I agree with David's proposal for a clear resolution in opposition if this is in fact the policy. But if this is in fact going to be the policy, then the position of CSU AUP will be that same privilege must be accorded to faculty members. And we will turn it into a huge fight on that basis. And I don't think they want a huge fight. We've been very effective in getting to the Board of Regents, and we're continuing those efforts. My guess right now is the individual members of the Board of Regents do not want to hear anything from CSU AUP. But if this is in fact going to be the policy, I can guarantee you they will start hearing from individual AUP members. Now, I did email Dean earlier and said, I'm hearing that the policy is going to be to accept any requests for non-mandatory exemptions. And he responded saying, I assume you're referring to students, which I thought very interesting. And I just said yes, and I haven't heard back from him since then. So I'm with you all.
Right. And I wonder, as you point out, Bill, the argument comes from the place that it's not yet, I forget it's not yet fully approved, right? So it seems to be, and I know that this is probably not the way the world works, but, lost in philosophy world as I am, the principle here is you can't mandate someone to expose themselves to some sort of medical risk. And it appears to me that having to show up to a workplace where there's not reasonable assurance that my classroom is right, or my office is not a medical risk, is precisely the same principle, right? So these things should be regarded as exactly the same thing. If we are unable to mandate it for anyone, then we are unable to mandate it for everyone, and fight that fight all the way through, because it does seem that the board acknowledges the importance of it and the spirit of it, right, in affirming this resolution. And it seemed to me that like Dr. Gates seemed really excited about it, you know? So I think the spirit of it is there, and it's just the enforceability and yeah, and again, I don't think that this is coherent. I have also lost track of where we are. We had a motion to receive this document, and I am interpreting the motion after that to amend it in some way, because it does seem that our statement on this on the unrestricted exemptions is very relevant to the existence of having received but not acted upon that resolution. Is that correct? And if not, how do I unravel what we've done here and make sure that we do it in something remotely like the right way?
Okay. I proposed a resolution separate from receiving it.
Okay.
And it's there in the chat room, that the FAC opposes any policy imposed by the system office to allow all non-medical exemptions, and consider this in contradiction to the mandated vaccination resolution agreed to by the Board of Regents on June 24th.
Okay. So let's back up. Let's go.
Kalina,
Yeah?
it's Pam, just as Robert's Rules of Order suggestion. Whoever made your first to move the motion to receive David's resolution, withdraw the motion.
Okay.
And then do a first and a second on David's statement that's in the chat.
Sounds good.
For the FAC to accept that as a statement for submission to wherever. But that'll cover you on Robert's Rules of Order.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And
Not
we now
my
have
area of expertise.
we now have a parliamentarian for the FAC. Thank you.
Yay.
No, just a math professor. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So does anyone, Lois, do you have a record of who made that motion? I know we usually rely on the recording. So
Who made
the
which
motion
motion?
Levi
to
made the
receive.
motion, Galena.
Okay, great.
Fran, yeah, Fran did.
Yeah, so I'll withdraw that.
Okay. And we need to withdraw the second also? Or is that it?
No, you don't need to withdraw this one.
That is it. Okay, good. So let's return now to the the statement that is in the chat.
I second it.
Okay. All right. And do we need any further discussion before we vote?
Not if nobody wants to discuss.
All right. Let's take the vote then. All in favor
Aye.
of adopting that statement? Yeah.
Aye.
One more. Aye. Okay. I'm checking all our constituents. Linda. And the chat. Okay. I believe we are good. Motion passed, so we've adopted that, and that will be entered into the minute.
Okay, I still would like to have the original resolution received as a document of the FAC. I don't even know that we need a resolution for that.
Okay, and I just want to make sure again that we clearly state somewhere, perhaps even on the document, that it was received but not adopted, so that there's no mistake about what we've done here.
Well, I
All
think
right,
received means that it's
right. But in isolation, it might be.
because I mean, normally we would have had a discussion on each of the items in the resolution, right? Because we would have been seriously considering how to improve the BOR resolution in terms of implementation. It looks like we've been basically short-circuited.
Yeah.
Right? And so consequently, I don't see the point of adopting it, but I do see the point of receiving it.
All right.
And I think you can go on to the next item on the agenda.
Sure. Well, we should take the vote on that, right? So motion.
I so move.
Okay, and second.
I'll second that.
All right, and all in favor.
Aye.
Aye.
Checking chat. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right. Okay. Do we move on? Okay. So the next item is the student first update. There was the update to our accreditors, NECHI, and to the legislature in the form of the Students First Finance update to the Higher Ed Committee, which was required in the 2019 budget. So this is the last of 4 that was required by that. I have very little to say. They are linked in the agenda, and by I have very little to say, we could talk about this for years and have all the standard issues. Bye, Patty. Thank you. All of the standing issues, I believe, remain. I see nothing significant, and we've talked also about the addition of new advisors without funding. You might also notice that the general number of faculty will be reduced in the next couple of years. And by 2024, the number of faculty will reduce, those staff will increase. So I think that will keep the sort of narrative of student-facing, right, staff, that number will stay rather steady. There are lots of other things. I'll leave it to you all. Anything worth talking about in those reports? Well, woohoo. Students' first discussions are never the most fun. So we'll probably return to them, I'm sure. I'm not sure how much time people have had with them either. So yeah. Item 5 on our agenda. No, item 6, because we have 2 3s for some reason. Shared services and new enrollment policies. So that item is on there because there have been issues with IT, right, Lois? There have been issues with HR. I did find it interesting that I think it was in the NECHI report. They're doing a second survey of CEOs and regional presidents about the adequacy of our HR support. I would love to see the results of the first, because I think it's widely known that you might get an email back from HR, you might not. Your student workers might get paid, they might not. So it has been quite a mess for quite some time. So I'd love to see what that report is. But you know, we know that we have those standing issues. We know that IT it works differently now. We know that admissions now goes to a sort of a generic number welcoming you to a college that doesn't exist, and tells you to wait for a customer service representative, and your call will be recorded. It's not the most sort of hospitable entry for a prospective student. And in addition, we have the NP summer grade policy that was devastating for some students. We basically ejected a bunch of students from our courses at precisely the moment where we're concerned about enrollment. So I'm just throwing all of those out there to see, you know, what we're experiencing, what issues we might want to discuss, and putting that sort of on the radar for those of you who have not heard about it, so that you can kind of track how that's going. Go ahead, Lois. Oh, you're muted.
Do you want to talk about some problems, or should I mention some problems, or no?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this was just to hear from folks about any of these issues. So yes, please.
All right, so I can put out, there's a couple of IT issues. I had an IT issue on personally yesterday, but there's a bigger one. Actually, I had two yesterday. Yeah. We have the largest, I guess, ESL population in the community colleges. And as you all know, the initial ID that they need to get into any of our technology includes the last 4 digits of your social security number. Well, of course, many of our ESL students don't have a social security number. So when IT was on our campus, they could just walk upstairs to the IT office and ask to have their password set. And if they had a problem with English, they could have somebody from the ESL department go with them to help them. Well, now they can't do, obviously they can't do that because the IT shared services, we have nothing that does anything local, so they have to put in these tickets. And for months they were being sent around in circles because they would call this number and then they were told that they couldn't be helped because they didn't have a social security number, and it just went round and round and round. And so I was asked in February if I could help out as a president of the Senate. So my suggestion was to allow a couple of people in the ESL department the ability to reset passwords because it's really easy to do. It's not rocket science. It's just really easy to do. You just need to get the authority. Well, I had a big fight with IT. They didn't want to do it. All kinds of things. And finally, they did agree. The administration stepped in to support me, and they did agree. And so they were supposed to give 2 people the ability to set passwords. Reluctantly, they did it, but it took 3.5 months for that to happen. Well, yesterday I found out that one of the people they were supposed to have given this, after it took 3.5 months to get this, found out yesterday that one person who was supposed to have been given authority to do this still didn't have the authority to do it because she tried to set a student's password and was told she didn't have the authority when she went into Banner. So I had to go through the process again, and then it took 5 months to fix this. And the only way we're fixing it is that they are allowing people from the ESL department to actually reset or to set passwords, which is just ridiculous. That's one of the issues. Another one was I had my own problem yesterday with setting a password. And because you can't set a password locally anymore, it took me hours and hours and hours to get it done. And I couldn't do anything while I was waiting to get it done. So there it is.
I think the most fun part of that story too, Lois, is that you are the ed tech director at your college and you were unable to.
Yes.
So it's kind of significant. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess I'll be more explicit about NP. So we have this new policy about non-participation, which is important for certain reasons, right? In terms of financial aid, making sure that people who are receiving financial aid for our courses are actually using it in the right way, and we can be on the hook for that money. So there's a reason to have the policies. I think really the implementation of the policy has been really poor because at no point have we been consulted about the wisest time to run those reports. And this summer in particular, it was a bit of an issue because it was, I think, 48 hours. We were asked to report non-participation, something like, I could be wrong. It's either 48 hours or 30 or 72 hours, but into the summer program, but without telling instructors ahead of time that that's what would be done. So there was no way to sort of indicate to students in your syllabus or otherwise to let them know that that would be the consequence of not having participated. Those of us who use like generous grace periods and so on, that could have been a real issue. And for those students who were removed from courses, there really wasn't enough time to get them back in so that they could participate in the summer course. because the period is so short and because it was such a cumbersome process and there was not much indication of how they were supposed to go about doing that. And, you know, again, when we are desperate for enrollment, you know, creating these sorts of hurdles are significant. And also, our summer students are not primarily using, you know, the majority of them are not necessarily using financial aid. So this, I think, was more of a process issue in the sense that had faculty been consulted about a wise time and then informed with enough time in advance to build their syllabi and communicate to students so that students knew that, it wouldn't have been such an issue. But again, we have this gap in communication between those of us who actually interact with students and those of us who set policies. So that was the issue there. Yeah, Lois.
And can I also say that I had five, because I'm writing, I wrote something in this letter that I've written to Netchi. I've included the NP issue. So I wanted to verify that as far as I knew, it looked like it was only applicable at the community college system, not the state university. So I emailed David and asked if the state universities do use NP, and he came back and said, no, they do not. So this is only focused on us, and the way it's been handled has been, as you have just pointed out, has been ridiculous. But it goes back to, you know, a text that they sent to all students last February saying that they were going to be thrown out of their classes if they didn't participate. And I got phone calls from students who were panic stricken because they had participated, but they got this text and they didn't know that they felt it was directed at them. So they didn't know what else they should have been doing. And it was, you know, just a nightmare. And we were not told at the individual colleges that this text was going out to the students. So it's just been a nightmare since it's been handled, and it seems to be unique to the community colleges only.
All right, so anything else about shared services? I know that, you know, I think one of the things David pointed out with the finance report is that there's a new shared services line for the universities now. So, you know, we're probably getting the worst of it because there's lots of growing pains. And while there is no path for communication and feedback about how effective these things are, so we don't know that they're informing our students that they need to participate in a generic way that has nothing to do with their level of participation, and they don't know from us, you know, what would be more helpful to actually do this effectively. So, I don't know if David's there, but okay. Anything else in terms of shared services and enrollment, etc.? Okay.
Colleen, I'm sorry. I was sure. I just needed to make a comment when you said enrollment. And I don't know if this has to do with shared services, but I do want to at least relay to you, for the students that I'm working with that are thinking of transitioning from the community colleges to CCSU, I have repeatedly in the last month or so have had students indicate their frustration about being able to communicate with anyone on the campuses. Everything is done via email, and they're telling me that they're not getting responses back from the campuses. I don't know if that is a computer glitch or what is happening, but you know, typically what I would do is whoever I have as a contact on the respective community college, I would email them, contact them, and see if they get back to me if there's a better way of communicating. But I do have, I have had that, and as of late, students are still at the community colleges, so they're calling my office to get advice on courses they should take at the respective community college campuses. But I think that is in part, I don't know if it's, you know, an enrollment issue, a communication issue, which seems to be the issue with the students. And then lastly, on another note, one of the other things that I have from another meeting or group that I participate with is when you are sponsoring or want to issue a check in response to a conference or anything else that we're offering, it's very difficult to process a payment for anyone on the local community college campuses because you have to go through so many hoops to get the check, I guess, issued by central office or the centralized operations. But that I've heard operationally has been a nightmare for many of my colleagues who participate. Let's say if I have a conference that there's a fee or they're sponsoring something, right? But those were some comments as it relates to operations, enrollment, and centralization.
Thanks, Myrna.
You're welcome.
All right. Anything else? I have sort of College for All and the Higher Ed Labor Summit on the agenda. Just as a little update item to let you know about what's going on sort of at the national level, which is kind of cool. And let me share that with you really quickly, just so you can, I think I have a link to the flyer on, here it is, on the agenda, but this is what it looks like. So the first day was, and I'll just give you a second to look at that and then I'll jump off, right? So the first day was Wednesday, Wednesday, and it's the second phase of it is today from 4 o'clock to 6:15. And the invitation went out really broadly to all, basically all higher ed unions across the country, but sort of in a sort of in a way where anyone who knew anyone forwarded it to, you know, who they knew, etc. And it was pulled together quite quickly. And I'm gonna stop sharing now. But we still managed to have about 250 people present at the last at day one, and I expect a few more in day two, simply because people have now heard about it, right? You know, not everybody was contacted at first. About 30 states were represented, 75 unions and organizations represented, and the people represented by those unions are, you know, over 300,000. And the idea was that there was a bit of a draft of a vision statement about sort of transforming higher ed, you know, responding to the fact that, you know, we have things like, what's his name, Paul Tuff's book. There's so many books now, so many reports, and we know from experience now that it's not entirely clear that higher education is always functioning as a good for those who participate in it, whether workers or students, right? When it comes to the debt that students incur, when it comes to the way that our colleges and universities have been transformed by reduced levels of state funding and increasing reliance on borrowed money, which means then that they have to always put first their credit rating, right, as opposed to their services to students. It also means that when they have those debts, they have to pay those first. They always legally have to pay those first before they take care of what the colleges and universities need. And we have seen the ways that our colleges and universities have been transformed by this. You know, the increasing sort of, as they put it, casualization or adjunctification, yeah, of faculty and staff, right? And this focus on being nimble, right? On making sure that we have increasing levels of administration, but less commitment to the workforce, because the workforce is the most expensive aspect of running institutions like ours. But they, you know, you need to be able to unload those costs again, right? Because we are borrowing too much. So the observation was that this is a national problem. All of our states are dealing with it. All of our institutions are dealing with it, with the exception of the most elite, well-endowed institutions, right? And what this actually means is that while we are crippling some students with debt and just barely benefiting them in terms of their life prospects with education, we have this divide where the very elite institutions are doing something completely different. So higher ed is now functioning to exacerbate the class divisions as opposed to heal them as they did, in the past. So very much coming at this as a coalition, a national coalition of folks who are aware and of our constantly changing function in society and committed to reversing the trajectory that we're currently on. So one of the pieces, but it's not the only piece, one of the pieces of this attempt to sort of address this issue is the College for All, Bernie Sanders and Jayapal bill, which asks for things like within 5 years, transforming most instructional faculty to tenure track as opposed to, so 75% of instructional faculty should be tenure track, and that tenure track doesn't mean necessarily like research tenure, it just means non-contingent, right? Some sort of permanence. And whereas right now it's the opposite, more than 70% of instructional staff across the country are contingent in some way, cannot rely on a contract next year or next semester, and tying that to federal funding. Things like that, tying certain labor practices to the possibility of accreditation, etc. So yeah, it was there was feedback on the vision on Wednesday, and then yesterday was a mad scramble to take all of the feedback received and so pack it in to the draft from Wednesday and revise it adequately. And then today at 4 o'clock, we present the final version of that vision statement, which this group of folks will sort of do a straw poll as to whether they want to endorse it, and then they will move towards getting unions across the country to officially sort of endorse this general idea of where we should head as higher ed across the country. So a sort of bottom-up led movement of higher ed, re-envisioning like what it should be. So that is happening. If you want to join, I'm happy to send you a registration link, and there will be further meetings. So this is just a vision setting meeting. There will be meetings down the line about what to do from there. It should continue past this. And I am curious in terms of like how that was described and, you know, what this is here, whether there's any, if anyone is, you know, what your thoughts are. Is there any cause for caution or concern from here? Does it sound like a good idea? Is this something we might want to participate in? I should say that, so CSU AUP is certainly part of this. I am, as foresees, and it helped organize it. And AFT, I know that there will be members from AFT there today to kind of see what's up, and down the line there will be a request to sort of officially endorse the vision.
Do you have the link? Did you put it in the chat?
Sure, I will put it in the chat in just a moment. I'm going to search for it right now.
Good. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. So campus reopening, I'll just move on to the next item. Campus reopening is just, it has been a standing item on the agenda just because it's something that's always kind of ahead of us. But I think we covered a good amount of that with the mandatory vaccine policy session. Is there anything else that we need to talk about there?
Do we have any indication whether there is any university or college where a statement or a proposal has been made for the modalities for return to on-ground teaching in the fall? Or is all this coming, in the middle of the summer in mid-July?
The administration at Easton expects us all to be on ground. And they've made it difficult for classes that weren't completely on ground, like hybrid classes. They've canceled. They said they have to be on ground.
I personally, my participation on ground is put into doubt if the non-medical exemption becomes universal. And I'm sure I'm not the only one. And I know that in any complex hierarchical organization, the gears don't quite mesh, and it takes a long time to do things, and there's a whole layer of bureaucracy. But what is going on is unacceptable.
I'm going to read from the chat. At Three Rivers, instructors are on campus, and a lot of the LRONs were shifted to traditional without warning. At Gateway, it's still the same for us. Every full-timer is required to teach one on-ground course. For me personally, and I think for a lot of others that I've heard from, but it might just be like, disciplines. I think humanities and social sciences is probably experiencing this more than for others, but no one's registering for my on-ground stuff. So I don't know if it'll run. I think most of us are in that position. We don't know if it'll run, and enrollment is still quite low. So maybe there'll be a rush closer to the time when people have some sense of what this fall will be like. Okay, Central, the blueprint for fall 2021 will be out by July 15th.
What's LRON again?
It's live, remote, online. So it's it's when you have like synchronous online courses. Okay, that's it. Alrighty.
Pardon me, just a curiosity. Are most of the LRON courses done with, what platform do they use?
Okay, so this is fun. So LRON designation, I think, is unique to the community colleges. Also unique to the community colleges is the restriction on using Zoom as an option. And I've heard so many complaints about WebEx. I mean, even on this recording, like I try my best to manage this meeting, but even on this recording, I guarantee you're going to hear crazy background noise. The audio in WebEx is insane, and a lot of students complain about that capability. So at the community colleges, WebEx is it, I believe. WebEx, Teams, and Blackboard Collaborate, which I believe still only allows you to see a few, or has that finally expanded?
It's been
Anyone
expanded
know?
a little, but it's glitchy. It was not
Okay.
expanded to what they said it would be, but at Three Rivers, most people use Collaborate because it's easy for the students to access.
Okay.
Most people dislike Teams and prefer WebEx if they don't do Collaborate.
Yeah. I have a real dislike for Teams, and I can't fully explain it because I think it's just, there's nothing objective. I just don't like it. Yeah, who asked that? Still off, right?
Thank you. Yeah, our Collaborate was boosted up, so now I don't use it. They took Collaborate away and they made it Zoom. We can use Zoom on in the state universities. We're still allowed to use Zoom. We had to ask for an account, and we would give them an account if we asked for it. If we didn't ask for it, we didn't get it. So we asked for it, and so I have a Zoom account. And they took away Collaborate, and they incorporated in Blackboard Zoom. So we can use Zoom in Blackboard. That doesn't make a lot of sense. Might as well just use Zoom directly. Blackboard. We have that. And then we have Teams, and Teams only has you can only have a few number of squares in Teams, and WebEx a few number of squares. Limited. You can't, it's hard to see the whole class.
Yeah, I agree. I still like Zoom so much more.
Yeah, it's
Okay. So the next item is adjourning. But I just very quickly want to confirm that we think that an invite to President Cheng for our next meeting is a good idea for just an open discussion for some time. Okay.
yes.
Sounds good. All right. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Woohoo. And no second is needed, and we can vote with our feet. All right, here we
Have a
go.
nice
I'll
weekend.
stop the-
Have a
Congratulate the
great
chair.
weekend. Thank you.
I congratulate the chair on finishing before 3 o'clock. I don't think I
Thank you very much. I'll do my best.
And I apologize to the members of this FAC for my naive enthusiasm about the BOR resolution on mandated vaccination. I've learned a lesson. I think it may still be possible to reverse this, but we'll see. If it's not reversed, then I think the consequences on the health and the safety of everybody in our community, faculty, students, staff, administrators, everyone except for the people in the system office who are safe on Woodland Street with a guard at the entrance to make sure you come in and are vaccinated. All that will be put in jeopardy.
Let's hope is a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Well,
So, thank you.
I will do
for
what little I
trying to
can
make this- Huh?
this weekend, and then, I think it's everybody has to make a decision about whether they wish to return to class in the fall or what other alternatives they have.